All right. So to begin, I want to just highlight that we're going to do four things. The first is we're going to look a little bit at the consequences of conflict in organizational life. So what are some of the ramifications of mismanaged or poorly managed conflict in organizations? We're going to take a look at the four barriers that get in the way. What are the things that keep coming up in every conflict situation? And by the way, you can take this stuff home too and use it in other parts of your life. But I suspect that you all, as advanced professionals, have done some thinking about the impact of conflict on your organization and in your teams. So how do we measure the cost of conflict in our organizations? So the first one I want to share with you is that poor relationships account for about 65% of performance problems. Now, if you think about that for a moment, how much time do we spend focused on the interpersonal relations versus people's skills and abilities as well as their motivation? On those latter two, that's what we tend to spend a lot of time on, is trying to get people motivated to do the job, trying to make sure they have all the skills to do the job. And yet, according to this research, people don't get their jobs done and aren't performing because they just can't get along with each other. So again, according to the same research, about 50% of people leave because they can't get along with each other. So losing good people, and this of course sets aside layoffs, but this highlights this issue of how many people you actually end up losing just because they can't work together. So the first question is, how impacted is your hospital by conflict? So 5 is, it's like a raging Armageddon. You're lucky to leave, every day in one piece. 1 is, this is like constant Woodstock. Everybody gets along with each other. You can't walk down the halls without getting hugged. So 1 to 5, how impacted is the organization by conflict? What do you say? I'm seeing lots of 3s. Okay, interesting, yeah. The average is actually 3.62. Based on that finger survey, yes. Just a little quick math in my head. Are you all overstaffed? That was a laugh line in. Do you have a lot of spare time, to spend a day a week dealing with it? Right. So in the context of organizational life and this fact that conflict is such a struggle for us, I want to give you some tools and tips and insights so that you can help people that are working with you and for you to be more successful with their conflicts. So that frees you up to be able to focus on the work, get things done, retain good people, and focus on what you all are here to do. So at the root of all conflict is an expectation that one and both sides have where they want to have something happen. They want people to treat them in a certain way. How do we know when we violated somebody's expectation?
It's usually too late.
Yeah, right. After, bam, after we stepped on it and it goes off. That's when we know that the expectation was important to the other person, but we didn't know it until we violated it. So this creates obviously quite a dilemma for us conflict resolvers, is how can you resolve something you don't even know that it's there in the first place? So this is the first apparent barrier to conflict situations. I'd like to ask, when you think about Shelley and Ted, what were some of Ted's expectations as I described that little scenario to you? What did he expect? What the probable, hypothetical, violated expectations were for each side in the conflict. So that's what I'm going to invite you all to do. You can refrain from using proper nouns probably since it's a small group. So any questions about what I'm asking you to do? All right, have fun. Okay, so this is foundational because everything that we're going to do from this point forward flows from this point. And what I'm suggesting to you all is that in all the work I've done, 26 years, 2,000 cases or so, I've always seen this phenomenon at play, that there's this expectation, somebody violates it, and then everything else starts falling down. It's kind of like defensiveness. Like, how quickly does it take for you to become defensive? How quickly? Fractions of seconds, right? Nanoseconds. It's almost instantaneous. So when that happens, when you have that feeling, when your employees have that feeling, it's usually because there's some expectation that they have that's not being met and in fact is being violated by the other person. All right, so what happens as a result of this is we start to feel like victims. All right, so the person violates some rule we have about how people are supposed to behave, and this leads us then to feel like we are victims, that it's intentional, that they're trying to do us harm. Woe is me, the poor me, because the other person is doing something mean, and therefore I'm a victim of their negativity, their bad behavior, just they're a mean and nasty person, and so I feel like a victim. All right? And I'm suggesting that this is true for you when you're embedded in the conflict. It's true when you're dealing with employees who are kind of doing things to each other. Now here's an important point about this though, folks, is that we're not talking about victimhood in the sense that, oh yeah, everybody's a victim and let's play the violins and feel sorry for people and, oh boy, that's really terrible. They must have done terrible things to you. And then you go to the other person that is involved in this, and how do you think that person feels? Person B. The same, exactly. It's not wordsmithing. They're not just playing a game. It's genuine victimhood. That's how they feel about it. And there are consequences in terms of resolving conflict that we're going to come back to that are critical, but you first have to accept this reality that people are not just playing games. They're not just trying to play it up. They really feel that way. Able to identify ways in which your participants felt like victims? All right, so let's review. What happens first?
Violate expectations.
Leads to? That's the spirit. And this leads to our next problem, which is vilification. Yes. So how do you feel about a person who violates your expectations and makes you feel like a victim? You think they're horrible. You think they're a bad person. It's almost like you end up putting on a special pair of goggles just to look at this person. And when you see them and they say good morning, you know, do you trust it? Think about your nemesis. Don't make any eye contact with anybody right now. Okay. Okay. But think about your nemesis at work. You know, if they say, "Hey, how you doing today?" Do you trust them? You know, do you think that their intentions are honorable? Let me ask you, when Shelley is walking past Ted on her way out, and Ted looks up and says, "Oh, Shelley, where are you heading? And when are you going to be back?" I'm going to give you two options, all right? Two options. Option A, Shelley hears this question and thinks, "Oh, excellent. What a on top of it admin assistant I have here. He's trying to figure out where I am, where I'm going, when I'll be back, so he can direct people to me, and he's really on the ball here. He's trying to do his job." That's option A. Option B is she thinks, that meddling so-and-so, he is just by asking the question, implying that I shouldn't leave, that I'm gone from the office too often. He's basically spying on me. You know, so I'm asking, when the conflict starts to evolve and we get to this stage, what do you think, which option was it, A or B? B, right. So in our journey here, we lead to another place. Another thing that starts to happen is that the conflict, as you can see, starts getting layers to it. Things tend to grow, and the spiral of conflict implies that one person does one thing, another does something in response, so the other does something else in response to that, and the conflict grows. And as it grows, we run into the fourth barrier for conflict resolution, is that we can't even tell what this thing's about anymore. Like, what started it? Why in the heck are we fighting anymore? So there's something at the middle of that bonfire pile that was actually important at the beginning, but it gets lost in the conflict growth. So, well, let's see here. I'm going to pile, you mentioned that, and that made me mad, so I'm going to mention the thing you said 3 years ago, and I'm going to put that on the bonfire. Oh yeah, well, you gave me a dirty look yesterday. I'm putting that on the bonfire. And we just start piling things on the bonfire, and it's so big and raging and hot, we can't even tell what it's about anymore. So this is the fourth and final roadblock to conflict, is that we don't know why we're fighting, don't know what it's about, and the cause, the source of the conflict has now been lost in the messiness of the conflict. All right, so this becomes actually a real linchpin that we can use to unlock conflict and actually resolve the situation. So I'm going to leave you hanging on that for a little bit. but I just want to embed this idea that there's a reason that people are fighting. It's deeper often than we think, and it's somewhere back at the beginning. And our job as good conflict resolvers is to try to identify what that root is, why it's important to each side. All right, well, you're in luck then, because you get the pig of happiness. Yes, yes. But folks, I'm about to give you the solutions. I'm not going to lead you down this path. It's not a dead end. I've given you all the solutions to conflict. I've just kind of cleverly disguised them. In fact, as Secretary of Health John Gardner once said, and don't worry, I never heard of him either, but he had a good quote here. We are continually faced with a series of great opportunities brilliantly disguised as insoluble problems. And so it is with these barriers to conflict. They look pretty nasty and insurmountable up front, but there's actually the seed of resolution built into each of those. And I'm going to walk you back through those in a little bit and help you get some insight into that. So are you able to identify some root causes? Yeah? All right. So this is a pause point. We're going to check in, make sure that you all are retaining all this information. So this is a competition. Each table has to, without looking at your materials, which you're going to close up right now, so cover up, close, don't look at it. All right, first table to reconstruct the 4 barriers, and raise your hand, will get one of these animals taken away from the other group. And if, yes.
So we don't get to do it?
So, no, you get to do it. You'll get an extra bonus. So reconstruct the 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, I saw that hand first. Okay, go ahead. Oh, no, they have to prove themselves. He violated my expectation, so I'm a victim. He did it because he's a bad, terrible person, and as this thing has grown, I don't even know what it's about anymore. I want to give you a little foundational concept here that'll help you be effective in dealing with employee conflict. All right? And when we're done, I'm going to hope that you have a slightly different mindset about this than you might currently. So the first question for us to consider is, as employees bring conflicts to you, how many of you all are neutral in terms of what they're fighting about and the personalities? Do you feel like you're an objective and neutral entity that can, like Solomon, split the baby or do whatever it's going to take? Do you have that kind of wisdom, neutrality when you're dealing with the conflict among your staff? And raise your elbow if you feel like you're neutral. Neutral, we've got a couple of claims here of neutrality. All right. You were just kind of, I like the dance you were doing, All right, so, we have all this stuff going on in our head, and we're dealing with the 2 different people. I'm not going to be neutral, and that's going to influence how this plays out then, isn't it? I'm going to start influencing kind of the outcome, and I'm going to lead them to solutions, I think, that are going to be more conducive and helpful to one side than the other, etc. So this is a slippery slope that I've seen many managers get into, HR people, all different professions where you're supposed to be helping people resolve their conflict, but we end up in putting our own bias into the mix and then framing it and having it go off in a direction that's different than what they would have come up with. So here's the point of all of this. The reason that impartiality is so important is it allows the people with the conflict to be the one to resolve their conflict. Okay, let me give it to you by this fella who figured it out 400 or 500 years ago. People are better persuaded by their own decisions than those that have come into the minds of others. So what I'm suggesting to you all, to managers, is kind of a radical idea, is that you have to actually trust that your employees will come up with the best solution to their own conflict, that they don't need you to grab them by the nose ring and pull them towards a specific solution, that you have to instead entrust them with their own ability to resolve their own conflict. The way we do that is through impartiality, that we allow it to play out, we give them the benefit of the doubt, we stay neutral as long as we can, to ask them questions so that they can come up with their own solution to their own conflict. Here's another kind of visual way of looking at it. So there are advantages to that. So why else do we do this? Why allow this to happen? What do you think the advantages are? Ownership, right. Yeah, so in terms of their ability to follow through and to really own the solution, that's what impartiality helps infuse the conflict with as well. She was overjoyed. She said, yes, that'd be great. She dropped the charges. No money was exchanged. It was just a very elegant solution. And I'm highlighting this for you to let you know that if I had sat at that table for 100 years straight, I probably never would have come up with that solution, right? It was so left field and out of the blue, but they came up with it. So it's more creative. It's more creative than the solution we might come up with. It's more meaningful to them, and they're going to follow through. All right? But that's not going to happen if we're putting our own spin on things, right? So I'm going to pause here and just let you digest this for a moment. I'd like you all to think about this concept and just see if you have any questions about it, what's challenging about it. So talk amongst yourselves. I'll give you about a minute to do that, and then we'll check in with you. Sorry, as a mediator, I'm always trying to get people to talk. As a trainer, speaker, I'm trying to get people to stop talking. So thank you. All right, so were you able to kind of think that through a little bit and make it real for yourselves? Any questions, concerns, objections, protests, insights, anything on impartiality? Do I have any converts here? Are you all going to try to be more impartial? All right, that's the spirit. So I saw heads nodding, yeah. All right, so impartiality, look, it's hard for me to do, and I'm trained in this stuff, and I do it for a living. It's going to be doubly hard for you all, and in particular because you know the people, and your job is often to try to work it out, to make a determination, to make a decision, which is why I'm harping on this so much, because I think you can gain a lot in conflict among your employees by just doing two things. One is allow some front-loaded kind of temporary impartiality. Okay, that's just one thing. Just as much as you can, hold back before you give your opinion, before you tell them what to do. That's kind of phase one of this. And the other is that if you just hold on to this fact that the conflict resolved by them is going to be more powerful than if you just impose a solution on them. And it's kind of like a go slow to go fast scenario. You go slow a little bit at the beginning, do the more listening and the hearing what they have to say and all that. Then down the line, you're basically teaching and training them how to be more effective resolvers of their own conflict. And I want to just close this section by saying, I get the worst conflicts that organizations produce. Right? They don't call me in because people like each other. They call me in long after they've tried a lot of different things and the conflict is really going to take people off the edge, and good, important, high-level people are in danger by the time I get there. I'm saying that even in those cases, the success rate of my work is about 80%. Now, that's not about me, that's just about this process of conflict resolution and mediation. We still get an 80% success rate even in the worst cases, and that is to say that people with the conflict are working out their own solution to it. So how do you solve the problem of the unknown expectations? I gave you the answer. Yes, you reveal and deal with them. Okay? So if we don't know what they are, and our job as good conflict resolvers is to reveal them, then we start asking questions that reveal what the underlying concerns are, what those expectations and rules are that people have, and then we just deal with them. And deal in this sense is kind of a shorthand for discussing, it's kind of dialogue and negotiation. So all the stuff I do, whatever I call it and dress it up in different ways, at the core it's just having people have conversations and negotiations. So that's what you can do on the expectations. What are your expectations? In fact, I have some questions for you could ask. Things like, what do you want her to do differently? Specifically, what do you want her to do? How do you want her to, or how do you want him to get your attention when he needs to meet with you? So what did I really emphasize about that quality of victimhood? What did I emphasize more than anything else? That it's both sides and it's
Their reality.
reality, right. It's true for them, right? So here's the challenge for you all folks, is you got these folks coming to you, you see, You know, you see Charlie, I hope there's not a Charlie in here, but you see Charlie coming down the hall at you, and you already know, what he's going to say, and it's going to be another tale of woe and all this, so you kind of have all these expectations about what he's going to be saying to you, and probably who he's even going to be talking about. So we have all that, and we are going to have a hard time thinking about him as a real victim in this situation, because it just doesn't seem like he is, based on what you know from your perch in the organization, and you know how he offends other people and how his part in it. But folks, he really genuinely believes that he's a victim, right? He's not just making it up to make himself look good. He's doing it because he feels that way. So then, what's your job with both Charlie and the person he's in a dispute with? What's our task? If somebody comes to you and feels like a victim, what's our job there? What do we do or say? Over here?
Impartiality.
Okay, yeah, true. So how do we get there? What are we doing? Just in the moment, real time. Me and Sam here. He's a victim. He's telling me about his victimhood. So what do I do? How do I act with him? Listen. Listen, right. And I'm going to be there with him and let him just vent, right? So that's your task. Now, how do we do that? This is the active listening 101 part of the conflict resolution training, which will last just 8 seconds. What do we do to listen to him? Some skills? Huh? Validate, eye contact. You all know this stuff. Summarize, paraphrase, all that good stuff, right? But here's the uncommon knowledge. This is why I'm actually harping on this point in particular, is that we do all that stuff for a reason. So why do I do that with him? What's the advantage of showing the victim that I'm hearing what he's saying? Why bother?
Because he feels better about it, and then he's a little bit more amenable to a resolution.
Okay, so he's kind of becoming more amenable to a possibility of a resolution. I mean, what else? I'm just really asking, what are the advantages of listening to somebody? Trust gets built up. Yeah, right. I'm getting more information. And this is an important point I want to highlight for a moment, is that in conflict resolution, information is power. When you have more information about the situation, you gain more power. It's just a kind of a fact of negotiations, a fact of conflict resolution. The more you know, the better position you'll be in to help people resolve it. And you're not going to get more information. I'm not going to get more from Sam if I just interrupt and say, okay, well, it sounds like, she said something that offended you. Well, get over it, and and here's what you can do. So I'm shutting them down, turning them off, and I'm not getting more information. Hence, I'm not getting more power. So all those things are good, but there's other part of this that we kind of miss, and it's not intuitively obvious. So I'm going to give it to you, and it is our issue about getting in a position where we can sow doubt. All right? This is a little esoteric at first, but because I'm going to walk you through this. So Sam talks to me, and I talk with him, and I explore the situation, and he starts to trust, he starts to share more, all of that. Then it gets to a point where if he feels like I really hear him, understand him, and I'm kind of there with him, then I get to a stage where I can start to ask him questions that dismantle this idea that he's purely the victim in the situation. So Sam, if you could redo that conversation with the other person, what would you do differently this time? All right? So I'm fishing here for a little self-awareness. Can he imagine that he did anything that might have been perceived poorly by the other person? So that might be one question. Sam, when I talk to Vicki later about this scenario and this incident you're describing, what do you think she's going to say about what you did? Now let's talk about vilification. All right, so we said that we tend to vilify the other person. We know that when Shelley sees Ted or Ted sees Shelley, they're going to look at each other and assume the worst. Like I had a case not long ago where the parties, one of them was saying that she found out her colleague was in a band outside of work, and so she thought, I'll find out more about that. Maybe that's the way to connect with him. We're not doing very well on the job here. We're having all this tension. So she started asking about his band. When I met with him privately, he said, oh yeah, she's been snooping around, trying to find out about my band. It's something else she's going to use against me, Yeah, and I know from talking to her, her motives were totally pure. She just wanted to, groping for some way to connect with him. And yet, you know, he had the lens on, always looking at the negative, and that's an example. So I ask you to consider the people that are working with each other. They start to think of the other as the enemy, as a bad person. Most people fall somewhere in between here. Most of the people we work with, even that person you're kind of frustrated with in your work world, the truth is that they're not probably a horrible person. They probably have friends and colleagues that do get along with them, and they probably do have family that appreciates and loves them and all that stuff. You know, but in conflict, we don't treat each other well. And that's my takeaway point on this section right here, is conflict, and the dynamic of conflict leads people not to treat each other well. And then we end up thinking that the other person's a bad person, when actually it's just the life cycle of conflict and that growth of the conflict getting worse that makes us not treat each other well. So what did you want to convey? What were you trying to convey when you did that? And this implies that I'm asking you what your intent was, because he certainly interpreted it way differently than you're saying it. And invariably, I'll ask that question, you know, Judy, what was your intent? Well, I just wanted to find out what was, what he was thinking about the project. Oh, well, then he says, I thought you were challenging me and telling me that I was off base and that my ideas were all bunk and horrible. No, I really wanted to know, Judy said. So getting people back to their intent can be quite powerful. And then this one, last one, again, I use it even in these hideous cases that I end up with, that people still appreciate things about each other. The Hank-Julie situation in the hospital, turned out that he hired her when about 10 years prior, and he actually recruited her, wanted her to come into the organization, and she kind of saw him as a mentor at the time. Now clearly over 10 years their relationships changed, she got more power in the organization and tensions arose and things, but at the core they actually had a high regard, a good history with each other. So it's that kind of stuff we're looking for to help de-vilify and debunk this myth that the other person is just a bad, horrible person. All right, so the last one is about what's it all about. So the conflict has grown and we don't know what the source is anymore. So the question we need to start asking ourselves is, what's really important? Okay? I'd like to ask you all a question though. Why do you care? Like, why did you have an emotional, gut level reaction to seeing me rip up a dollar bill? What was it about that dollar that triggered that kind of feeling?
I was wrong in my assessment.
No, it's a real dollar. I'm 100 pennies poorer now, yeah. But I have trust that it was worth it. It was worth $1 to teach you all this, yes?
Value.
Okay, value. But we're going to do kind of like the 5 whys thing. So why does it have value? What does it represent to us? Why do we care about dollars? Why do you want to have some of those in your pocket and in the bank? Which one? Okay, there we go. So that's kind of a core value that we attach to money. If I have enough of those, I'm not going to starve to death tonight. I'm going to have a roof over my head. Okay, so I get basic security. What else does money represent? What else does it give us? Hard work. And so what do we get from our hard work? We get a sense of reward, accomplishment, affirmation. Okay, so affirmation. Society values what I do enough to give me some of these so that I can, take care of myself and my family. So affirmation. So money represents security, affirmation. What else? Sure, patriotism and all the things that wrap up in that for us as well. Power, how about? Some control over your life. Folks, the point I'm making here ultimately is that we end up fighting about the piece of paper, but when I ripped it up, I didn't rip up a piece of paper. There's all kinds of paper here I could have ripped up and you wouldn't have cared. But I ripped up a dollar bill and you cared a lot. And what I'm suggesting to you all is that all conflict is like this. It looks like it's about one thing. It looks like it's about job duties, shift assignments. It looks like it's about how we communicate and the use of email and direct conversation and all that stuff, the messages and projects. But what it's really about are the kinds of words that you all just alluded to. Power, control, understanding. So they can argue about that all day. But when he translates his needs, or you as the resolver, translate it into their underlying needs and say something like, so Shelley, one of the things I'm hearing Ted say here is that he wants to be valued in the work that he's doing. Is that right, Ted? And he says, yes. Now, do you think she's going to look at him and say, Ted, I don't care about your need for being valued? No. And again, even in these mean and nasty cases I get, people don't go that low because they don't actually feel that way. They actually can see the value of that. So my point to you all is if you transmorgify, to use the technical term, you transmorgify the conflict from the apparent surface level stuff and start bringing up the underlying needs, then you fundamentally change the conversation. Yes, we can all think of those cases that are just seemingly impossible, right? But I'd like to encourage you to try anyway. So the things that we've been talking about, and the skills and the mindsets and the things that we've been exploring can work. Did you move up like a half a finger on the scale of confidence? All right, good. I'm glad to see you. Nice to work with you all. All right, thank you. Anything else?